What is up, everybody?
Hey, everyone.
It's me and Ryan. We're here to be dumb for a little while. What's up, man?
All good things, brother. How are you?
I'm amazing. I'm glad to be doing this. Hi, everyone out there
cool.
in the world. It's me and Ryan Colt Levy, who is the voice quite prominently of the Chainsaw Man himself. He's just full of teeth and violence, as well as
full of it.
My brother from the same mother, not brother from another mother.
Yeah.
In Fire Emblem Three Houses. So this is Nava's the Brad Venable Fund. BeBrad Nava is all part of like a sort of network of voice actor led associations, charities, whatever you want to call them, that essentially help voice actors who are just starting out do things like get education, get equipment. In some ways, most importantly, get health insurance. Nava just did this incredible effort to get basically their own health insurance plan, which is super important because many voice actors don't have health insurance. If they're not in the union, or if they don't make a certain amount of money through the union, they don't get health insurance. They're just sort of out there on their own. Occasionally, like if they have a bad year, they'll get kicked out of the health insurance program, which is just this wild circus that we have actors.
It's too much of a thing, I think, just like as society, like, and like the systems that kind of work everything at large, the fact that artists don't have a safe, guaranteed space to pursue their careers with stuff like insurance just inherently part of it is pretty awful. So to have people fighting on your behalf, you know, to really make sure that you can explore your craft and find a career is pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, it's really cool. It was like one of the biggest hurdles for a lot of people. You know, they're inside. I was talking to Tim Friedlander, who I'm sure we'll talk about later. He's one of the big heads behind Nava, who actually this entire audience has seen many years ago when Ace Combat 7 came out. Tim and I were on together chatting.
Oh, that's amazing.
He's the voice of what's the AWACS? Oh crap. Chat, help me out here. What's the name of the AWACS? Not. I was full band. He was. Full
band is a great name.
Yeah, nice call sign. I can't remember what it was. In any case, he was on here. He was the AWACS, and that was like our Longcaster. Thanks. Oh well, that's probably you, Tim. Nava Voices, is that you? Are you in the chat? Tim's answering his questions about himself. Yeah. So you guys are also are familiar with Tim. Nava Voices can answer all of your questions in chat. If I don't know the answers to the question, just feel free to add him in chat. That's Tim. He's a fantastic person with a fantastic voice, also extremely talented. So you said you wanted to say something about Brad. Tell me your story, Ryan.
Oh my gosh. Well, I have so many things to say about Brad. He was an extraordinary human being and an artist. And I think what you immediately made me want to tap into with him was, I think part of what made him such an incredible person and performer is he was so comfortable with being vulnerable and open in front of strangers. And from like not just a perspective of being in a workshop with people you may or may not know, just performing something raw and being comfortable with inevitably where anyone can just fall on their face, you know, like it's so easy to slip up, especially when you're doing something like in a theatrical setting, and you know, to feel that anxiety and to not want to give yourself over to something completely in worry of that, instead of just being like, let's go for it. And he was the same way as a person. When I first met him, I remember it was, you know, at a coffee shop. I had just happened to go into a place with another friend, and they had known each other, so they started talking. He was like sitting there, and then I was brought in and introduced, and it was within 10 minutes, I was just involved in a conversation that was incredibly candid, you know, from his perspective of his life and all this stuff. And I was just allowed to be, you know, privy to this and have a dialogue with him. And I was like, this guy is so kind and open and willing to like share this stuff, you know, with a total stranger. I admired that really deeply. And he spoke so highly of his peers, of this craft, of this industry, spoke loudly when he didn't like things that happened and didn't like the way things were being handled or people were being treated or whatever the scenario may be. He wasn't just soft, he
Yeah.
was powerful,
He was.
and his kindness was big and his strength was large. I don't think I know a single person that we know or otherwise that has met him that hasn't like walked away impacted. He was extraordinary.
He really was just a very kind. You said vulnerable. He was always like just very empathic, in tune with the people around him, whether he was at a huge party at the Fat Dog or he was or whatever, it didn't really matter. I used to go on like double dates with him and his wife, and it was always very like warm. It always felt like you're just kind of cozy by a fire when you're
There's
hanging out with
nothing
Brad.
like a Brad hug, dude.
Really,
oh my god.
seriously.
And he would know like from across the room, again, like in a party or something, he would like just sense like, if you're like a little like, I don't know where I'm
I'm
to stand,
new here,
or like, and he would just like suddenly be there, and you'd suddenly get lost in conversation, and suddenly you're like, well, I'm having a great time now. Oh my god.
And that dude, like his voice could shake. He was an opera singer. Like he was a trained professional opera singer. That dude could shake a room.
He could transform. See, he honestly, and this is the first time as I'm saying it, I'm having a realization. He was like, to me, for voiceover, the way like Philip Seymour Hoffman was for film. Like he could transform emotionally into spaces with his voice that could move me so deeply in ways that like, and then you talk to him and it sounds nothing like him. It sounds like It's like nothing like his energy, and you're like, wow, how do you? He was like Meryl Streep,
Yeah,
like,
I get that. I totally get that. It was like he could be like he really could. He could change a lot. He could change a lot.
He was extraordinary.
He was fantastic. Well, since we're talking about like getting started, right? And how Nava is helping people get started. How did you get started? Like, what's your origin story?
Beautifully so, Mr. Tim Friedlander is very much part of my origin story, and 100% why I have a career. Growing up, even just as a wee one, I was obsessed with film, and I had my NES, I had my Nintendo system, I had my Sega Genesis. I was I was obsessed with Star Wars, and I would take my dinosaurs and my action figures and my parents', camcorder, and I was making movies. I wanted to be Steven Spielberg. By the time I hit 12 years old, growing up in New York, it was hard for me to like take the creative, imaginative side of being, an actor, director, whatever I thought I wanted to do. This was before the internet. This was like, go get a backstage from the newsstand, kid. And I was like, I don't know how to do that. So to me, it wasn't permeable. It felt like to do any kind of acting was like royalty. So by the time I was 12, I found guitar and was like, this is something I can just do. I can figure out how to play this thing. I can make my friends play instruments. We could start a band. We could write songs. There's a path here that I can control. And so for a very long time, from 12 to more or less into my early 30s, I mainly just focused on being in a band and touring and recording stuff. And I had done some theater, in high school, and made short films with friends, and always obsessively studied acting as a craft, but I didn't pursue it. And then I moved to Los Angeles in 2015 with my bandmates. And while we were still making music, I figured, well, I'm living in Los Angeles, may as well dip my toes back in for fun. Let's see if I can do some extra work. I was thinking like, I'll do background work. I'll get my, feet wet on set again. Right. I will learn the craft again. I'll start taking acting classes again. And I thought, if I'm going to do this, I have to treat it with respect, even if there are things that I think are silly, So I did all the things, and I am now like, beginning of like 2019, I'm working, a bunch of different jobs just to survive, while being in the band and stuff, because we're hemorrhaging money, because no band makes money.
Because you're in music, right?
Because we're not Coldplay, you know? So we essentially broke up, and it was the first time in a very long time in my life that I didn't have that as the center of my creative world or responsibility. And my body immediately like internally switched and was like, oh, I'm supposed to be acting professionally, which is crazy. And I was, and at the same time, my job liquidated my entire department. So I was fired effectively and put on unemployment the same week that my band broke up. So I was like, clean slate. And I was in Los Angeles going, okay, I've got, X amount of money that's going to be theoretically coming in from the 6 months or so of unemployment, and I've got very little saved, because who can save on, making that kind of scratch while being in a band in LA? So I've got realistically, and I'm going to take acting classes, do all this stuff. So that's money that's going to go here, here, and here. So theoretically, I've got like 3 months that I can survive in LA. And I just hit the ground hard and started training aggressively and started taking any kind of extra work I could, and like eating barely not, it was feral. It was survival mode, and it was scary. But I started getting little trickles of things, and then this voiceover job happened by accident, and I was like, oh, that's really satisfying. You just immediately get to play. And I fell in love. And then, funny enough, in my acting class, a peer of mine brought me into a production, an on-camera short film that he was making that was directed by someone named David Sobolov, who is a stellar voice actor.
Guy.
Yeah,
excellent guy.
We became fast friends. And by the end of that production, he asked me if I did voiceover, and I said, well, I've now thought about pursuing it, but I don't have a demo. And he said, well, let me help you produce one.
Right.
Then I met Tim through him, produced my reel there, and within a few weeks I was working in some studios on Final Fantasy Remake. Was like one of the first things I ever booked. Like,
that's awesome.
Yeah, which is a really like hysterical, perfect, like very green moment thing where I went into that session, you didn't know what I was working on because it was like a bunch of NPC things. I was wearing a leather jacket when I walked in, so I'm just making all the noise in the world, like on this microphone.
Yeah.
Like, oh, right, everything is, and, meeting the engineer and the director and everyone for the first time, and just trying to be out of everyone's way and easy to work with. So I'm like super nervous, and they turn on the monitor and they walk in the other room, and I see on the script like Midgar, Cloud, and my brain is just like, and I wanted to go, do you guys know what this is? But it was so kind, and yeah, that really was like the beginning of everything. And I was like, I can't go back.
Yeah, that's amazing. I had a career before I came to LA, but one of like the first jobs I booked in LA was Fox McCloud. I think I definitely booked it within the first 4 months I had been here.
And you were a Star Fox fan already.
Yeah, I mean, like I had played everything. And
that must have been mind blowing to be like, oh, guess what? You're this legendary franchise hero. Like,
it was to date, I think the only time I ever like got an email and then like jumped up screaming. I think, and like I remember like jumping up off the couch and just yelling like Fox McCloud, Fox McCloud, Fox McCloud. And it was just such a weird way that I got the job. It didn't make any sense. And all of a sudden,
how did it happen? I would love to know.
It was an online casting.
Dude, it was meant to be. I mean, that's just how this stuff works.
It was pitched as, I think it was pitched as a voice match, but then like not structured or paid that way at all. And then it was like, oh no, we're doing like a mini movie, and you're Fox McCloud. Can you sign this NDA? Like it was a super weird.
That's
situation.
Fascinating. That is so fascinating.
It's so funny to think like how often people just straight up stumble into this career.
I was like most of us do.
Yeah, most of us are just like, well, sure, I guess. Do you do do you do voiceover? And you're like, what?
Yeah, well, it's such a funny thing because it's like, love video games, love cartoons. Like, most of the most impactful things on me have been, voiceover performances, or, there's so much of that has changed my life. And yet it was one of those moments where it took like, like I couldn't process it. And I was like, oh, right. That's a job. Like,
yeah, it's a real job. And I remember like realizing, because I started in late 2013. And I remember realizing like, oh wait, I hear a lot of people talking throughout my day. Everybody got paid for that. Like everybody got paid for like that guy who's like, please stand clear of the closing doors. He got paid for that. Like somebody handed him money to talk into a microphone. Yeah. Can I do that?
I mean, dude, talk about like celebrities. That guy's a celebrity.
That guy's a celebrity. He should be on here, not us. What kind of training did you do? Because my path was all weird and different, and I didn't do a lot. But I know that like it's not always available. So like, how did you get involved?
So, I've always been a couple of things, which is a huge film nerd, resourceful,
Yeah.
and for a long time broke. So
Yeah.
you know, up until recently, like I was always just in survival mode. So a lot of the ways that I would educate myself, you know, it wasn't necessarily, you know, because a lot of the time I think we often talk to people who want to become actors in any capacity, and often their first hurdle is they don't have money for classes or whatever it is that they are comfortable with investing without it, you know, going somewhere else that they need to, like rent or whatever, you know, and which is understandable. And for me, you know, I would do a lot of like, I'd buy books on film, on acting from secondhand stores or get them from the library. And a lot of people don't realize that you can get acting classes by literally reading books. I mean, I have them on producing, on writing, on everything. Like, I am a nerd for story, for collaboration, for all the things that an actor needs to be able to be prepared to do. And if I wasn't able to be in a class with someone in that immediate time, I would get a book with plays and find a friend who was down to rehearse some stuff and work on it. Or, you know, I would just watch movies and study them, or listen to performances and play video games. Like, use it as an excuse to take in media, but be attentive to it. You know, don't just let a movie make you feel. Really think about why that performance is making you feel, why those internal responses are matching the physical responses, or whatever it is. Like, you can study a thing that you enjoy, and it can really inform you. I mean, one of my favorite things that I ever learned was from a David Bowie documentary, where he basically just talks about how great artists steal. And I was like, you know, amazing. Yeah. And I try and take from every performance that has ever inspired me in some way, and, you know, like regurgitate it into something else and funnel into something else. There's probably, I'm sure every director I've ever worked with, even though they've forgotten what I've mentioned, will say like, oh yeah, at some point when we're working on a session for something, I'll mention some weird movie or novel or something, and I'll be like, oh, this reminds me of this character or this thing or this, like blah blah blah, and there'll be a reference that I will, you know, because
right.
So I think that's an important thing for, like, if you're broke and you want to learn, go to the library and get a bunch of books on film, get plays, get things that you can study, and just play.
Yeah. One of the you said good artists steal. It's so interesting, like in my like author days, like novel writing, when you steal as an author, like a lot of times it's like, well, you end up being derivative, right? Like it doesn't feel fresh. But when you steal as a musician, or you steal as like a voice actor, it's like you can't replicate whatever that was perfectly anyway. So now I think it was Pat Fraley was like, there are no bad impressions. There are just new characters.
Yes.
Right? My voice for Duke Detain is just a really bad Patrick Warburton impression. Like, that's all it is. But it comes out as like a fresh new character because I can't do Patrick Warburton.
It funnels through you, and you know, it's also, it's the other things that we talked about that so beautifully Brad would show is, you know, allow yourself to be vulnerable when you are, you know, doing these things. I think the hardest thing, especially like for people who are new, is to be vulnerable with auditions.
Yes.
Because they think it's like, especially because they're probably getting only a few at that time. You know, you only get so many in the beginning. Sometimes it's like
very dangerous.
Yeah. So you see that one that you may have for that like 2 weeks or something, and you're like, this is my only chance. I have to impress everybody. And you overthink everything versus allowing yourself to be free in that moment and show them who the character is to you. And we all learn as we go that it's far better to take the risk, which doesn't even necessarily mean some outlandish choice, to take the risk and trust that your interpretation of the character, regardless of you booking it or not, is still the better choice.
It's like a casting director, and I've always said, like, a casting director will smell desperation on your read a mile away. And the only way, this is like a business advice, it was like the only way to not sound like you need a job is to not need a job. I always encourage people, like, have a backup plan, you know, like, so, yeah, but like taking risks, super important. I think one of the most pieces of feedback, like as I went, because I didn't really start doing a lot of coaching until later in my career, when I was like, okay, now I'm established. I want to be very, very picky about the roles. I'm like, I'm going to put a lot of this behind me, and I want to find very specific, fulfilling, dramatic work. And I would get feedback from casting directors. They're like, yeah, that read was exactly correct. And that would be like the end of it. And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, right? Like that was, what a perfect read you just did, right? And so it really is about taking risks. And even if you don't book that job, but you make an impression, you still book the job. Like that's still a victory, because that casting director, I can't tell you how many times people have been like, oh yeah, you read for me 18 months ago. I want to bring you in for this.
Oh, dude, how many times have you had an email where you're like, I booked what? I didn't read for this. And then you get in there and you like, oh, hey. And they're like, oh yeah, we brought you in because you read for this thing 2 years ago.
Literally
and we
last
you'd be
week.
Great for this.
Like it actually happened. It happened twice in the last month. You know, it's just, you never know what seeds you plant are going to grow.
Well, and people are just in general, just like, I think people don't realize how much people are just paying attention.
Right.
And also rooting for you. And it's not about immediate results. It's about understanding that this is a lifestyle and a career, and it's not a fad. It's not something you can just dip your toes in. Something you have to commit to on a lot of different levels. And I was actually explaining this to a friend the other day, how there are some situations where maybe a casting director gets your audition and you might be the perfect choice, but they haven't worked with you. Nobody they know has worked with you. And this particular job has a lot riding on it, and they need to trust that you can be reliable, XYZ, blah, 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 blah. They may not know that you are. So they may sit on that audition and be like, let's just keep paying attention to this person. That was incredible. You may read for them 3 or 4 more times and still not book with them, but they're like, they're the one. Yep. And then eventually they're going to bring you in for whatever reason that lines up. And it's like, you may not know how often people are like, oh, you're already stellar, even though you may not be booking the thing, and you're thinking, what am I doing wrong? And they're like, oh my god, he's kicking ass. Now it's just a matter of like XYZ happening first. And it's hard to explain. All of this stuff is so amorphous. The entertainment industry is bizarre, and I think a lot of people who want to pursue voiceover in particular forget that while this is a small niche and we are lucky that people are relatively egoless and it's a really kind community, we're still in the entertainment industry.
Yes.
And it is still a machine, and there is still so much more at large than just this. And you have to be aware of that and educated with that and respectful of it.
How did you get involved? Like, what was your path to booking for Shahid? Because you made that comment about like they hear your audition, but then they don't book you for that because you're still a risk, and then later, and then boom. And that's essentially what happened to me with Fire Emblem, was that a colleague of ours, for whatever reason, mentioned my name to Cup of Tea and was like, you should check out Joe. I was very new. I mean, like I had been in town for, 2 years by the time that I was in this process. And then they booked me on a small part, and then another small part, and then Claude. So like, what was your path to, and so this all happened because
that's so cool.
Like one person was like, check him out. And that was like seal of approval. This person is no longer a risk, which is what you were describing. Before that, you're a risk.
That is a huge part of it. First off, that's so super, super cool. I mean, you are so, allow me to gush at you for a second. You are so freaking good in that part. It is so relaxed and fun and awesome, and I love it. You take him into some really interesting places in the new game, which is really cool.
Yeah. It was fun to explore.
Super cool.
So what was your path to Shahid? How did you get there?
So the Cup of Tea crew also, they're incredible.
Mm-hmm.
They I think are really, really, they're familial in a way that they are very protective of who and how they work with people, but they are also incredibly open in a really badass punk rock way to letting in new people all the time, because they see the light in you and they're like, you're part of it. Like, they don't put up a wall. They really open the door. But it was a similar kind of thing where I actually, through David Sobolov, I remember we were having lunch one day, and we were just talking about studios that I was working with, and because I was still so new that I had only been working at a couple of places around town, and he had mentioned them, and I was like, I don't think I've even heard of that name. And I didn't realize, like, oh, I've played a bunch of these games, and that's where they make them. Oh, that's amazing. And he told me to reach out to them. So I reached out on his behalf and just kind of said, hey, I'm new in town. David told me to reach out to you. And they immediately got back to me and were like, we love David. Okay, that's good to know. Send us your information. So I sent them whatever I had. and I didn't hear from them for a year. And
Yep.
which is how it goes, you know. And I didn't think anything of it one way or the other. I just thought, well, I'm on their radar, you know. And I remember we followed each other on like Instagram, and like, you know, Danny would just write to me every now and then and just comment on other things I was booking, and, you know, it was just kindness, and they would see me doing other things. And then literally like a year later, she sent me an audition, and it was my first time getting to read for them, and I was like, oh, this is really exciting. And I knew certain things that they worked on, so I was like, oh, it could be all kinds of stuff. Oh my gosh, this is really cool. And so I read for it, and I didn't book it, and I was like, I've totally disappointed her. Like, you know, like,
man.
you know, like you know, like in my, you know, dumb actor stuff, you know, I was still really green, so like I was still thinking stuff like that. But I didn't. It's not like I reached out or anything, going like, "Hey, you know, like just so you know, I could do better," kind of thing. I just internally,
Thank
you
God.
know, yeah. You know, but I internally thought, you know, oh man, I know that they were rooting for. I could tell that obviously that was, you know, the thing where they were like, let's give them the shot, and I didn't do it. And then I think it was like another 6 months until I got another thing, and then they sent me that. I didn't book that either, and then something else came, and then I booked that. And it was a small thing. And then I worked with them on another thing, which was the Shin Megami Tensei game, which was incredible.
Yeah.
And that was really when we like got to play, and I got to know them better. I cut to a couple of years later at this point.
Right.
And I get an email on like a Wednesday or Thursday night at like 9 o'clock at night from Patrick, who I've never spoken to before.
Right.
I know Patrick, you know, I know his work, you know, but I didn't know he knew who I was. The My Hero film had come out, so we had technically worked together, but again, I didn't think he knew who I was.
As much as any two voice actors really ever work together, right? You know?
Right, exactly. So I was like, you know, I'm just some other guy to him, you know.
Right.
And but apparently he had my email, or I guess he got it through Danny, and so he sends me this obscure character with no real information on it. Like the whole thing was just kind of not what it was. And he's like, hey man, you know, if you could you shoot me over this by, you know, tomorrow morning? And I'm like, hi, sure, cool. So I immediately go into the booth, and I do a take, and I send it over, and he gets back to me like 10 minutes later, and he's like, oh, awesome, can you send me one even crazier? And I was like, sure. So I go and I do an even crazier one, and I send it in. And then like 2 or 3 days later, I get, you know, word from my agents that they want me to go in for a project there. And I'm like, oh, I guess I booked that thing, not knowing anything of what it was or process. And then I get into the room, and, you know, Patrick's there, and he's incredibly kind and warm and awesome. And he's kind of like smiling at me, and I'm like,
I love Patrick.
Yeah, like,
he loves a good reveal.
Yeah, like, so he's, you know, he's got that big amazing grin. He's just kind of like, and I'm like, and he's like, so you know, we brought you in for this thing, your read was great, and blah blah blah, and have you played Fire Emblem? And I'm like, yeah. Like, and he's like, did you play the last game? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, oh cool, okay, so you're familiar, so you're gonna be playing Joe's brother. And I was like, what? Like, they showed me the art, and I'm like, this is the coolest thing ever.
That's fantastic.
Process, because they're like, okay, yeah, now get in the booth, and I'm like, I need like 2 minutes.
Yeah, you know, that's the way it goes too. Like, there was no preamble for Claude. It was just like, get in the booth. You know, like, you don't have time for that crap. Get in the booth.
But that's the best thing about this job at the same time, is it's always just get in the booth, and it's like, playtime is playtime, and there is, while it's equally terrifying, finding a character like immediately with a team of people is so exciting.
It is. It is. And, you know, like, you have the benefit of the audition too. It's just like, okay, we're going to play your ref. We love that. That's why we hired you. You're obviously, you're supposed to be here. You know, screw your imposter syndrome. Like, we literally heard this. This is you. Go. You know, like.
And the reality is, it's like, so much of it is then just take yourself out of the room. Mm-hmm. You're telling a story. Tell the story. Like, let the story talk to you and tell the story.
Yep.
And get out of the way.
Yeah, exactly. Man, that's awesome. That's a cool story. And
I was so excited to get to, dude, like, to get to particularly play off of you. That was the coolest.
It was great. Those scenes were fantastic. Yes, they were fantastic.
And then sitting on it for like a year.
You played a phenomenal asshole. Like he was such a jerk. And like you as the player are torn, be like, oh, that's my brother, but I hate him, but he's my brother. Oh, what a bastard. But brother, you know, like, it was It was so great. It was so great.
Fun.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I love playing asshole characters. You just get
It's
like
so fun.
It is fun. It's fun.
really cathartic, and like you laugh after every take because you're like, oh, who says this?
Who
like,
says that?
Yeah. Well, and the reality is, I don't think until now we've ever seen the industry have such a spotlight either.
Yes.
You know,
totally.
and I don't think it was necessarily prepared for it in the best of ways. So like, you know, as we all kind of go through this together in this really awesome, exciting transitionary period, we have to really do it with grace and with an education and with, you know, an ability to also protect and pass down this for the next wave of people who are coming through. Like, you know, I've only been at this a couple of years, and I've been really fortunate to have a lot of incredible opportunity thanks to different people giving me a chance and things being available to me at the times that they needed to be when you know, and me being, you know, aware of how, you know, looking to find them. Like, I didn't have a home set up until right before the pandemic happened. Like, essentially I was, and it was a timing thing too that was just beautiful. I was at a voiceover convention in February, at the end of February, and one of the vendors there was Vocal Booth to Go. And I see this thing and I'm like, well, this is pretty incredible, and this is something I can afford on the budget that I have, which is, you know, peanuts. So and I can set it up in my apartment that I know I'm not going to be staying in, you know, so I don't want to get a studio bricks, you know, like, and like cement that thing into my life.
I moved the studio bricks 3 times. Way better than like a Whisper Room or LA Vocal Booth where you got to unscrew stuff. It was like it came apart like Legos. One person can carry every piece. Fine.
But that's still
it was, I didn't like it.
Yeah,
but,
that's intense. Yeah. But, you know, I essentially found them, and then like 3 weeks later, I was ordering one because I was like, oh, I'm going to be home forever. Yeah. And it literally saved my life. It saved my career. And I was able to do everything from home. And that was really where my career actually like took off, which is crazy, is like while I was just isolated, it's kind of bananas how it all can work. So,
that's cool.
You know, your life can change dramatically with this career in the most beautiful ways, but you have to be able to protect yourself and be ready for that thing emotionally and otherwise. And the fact that there are people out there and organizations like this that want to protect you, like we have to give back to them and protect them. We have to give them the ability to only grow larger and facilitate this on a larger scale, because this is how we preserve an industry.
Absolutely. But dude, I know you got to get going. You said 1 o'clock.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, brother. Oh my God, thank you all for having me.
It's been good to chill out.
This has been incredible. I am so grateful for everybody who's hung out and donated. This is truly how we keep this industry and this community going forward. So thank you guys for being here and sharing and helping your peers and people grow.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Ryan. We're gonna get a beer soon or something like that. Make some music. There's music in our future. I know it is. I don't know what it's gonna be.
Oh yeah,
it's gonna
please.
happen,
I would be honored.
Okay, thank you,
Ryan.
Ryan.
Thank you so much, buddy.
Thank you, everyone. I will see you Monday. It's Friday, right? I think it's Friday.
Yeah.
I'll see you Monday. Have a great weekend, everyone. Thanks for coming by.